Hey everyone, Reed here with Big Strong Book, here today to talk about Return to the Whorl by Gene Wolfe, the third and final installment of the Book of the Short Sun, and the 12th and final overall chapter of the solar cycle. So, got my silk fur Calde shirt on, featuring Wolfe's perhaps greatest animal character creation, Oreb, with some graffiti saying "Good bird." Felt it was apropos to this interview to lead it off with that. Um, I just have to say this was fantastic in every sense of the word. Uh, any apprehension that I might have had coming out of In Green's Jungles, which, as I had mentioned in that review, kind of left me a little discombobulated. Probably not too far unlike our narrator in his identity and trying to figure out what was going on and what his purpose was. And so too does the reader feel discombobulated in terms of trying to figure everything out. And as I had kind of suspected leading into the final installment here, we get yet another sort of narrative technique shift in a way that I think is immensely readable for this. This book alternates pretty much chapter by chapter. One chapter picking up with the future narrative that we ended with in Green's Jungles with Horn, Hyde, and Jolly kind of making their way towards New Viren, towards Lizard, towards Nettle, towards the home of the Horn family, and then we have another narrative that these alternate chapters pretty much for the most part that focuses on Horn upon, or the narrator I should say, upon his return to the Whorl after he, spoiler, dies on Green, and then appears in the Whorl, perhaps thanks to the help of the neighbors, the vanished people, but he finds himself in the body of Patera Silk, and thus begins his wonderful, reflective, and painful journey back. With this series, it starts as a man, Horn, wanting to find Silk, to bring him to Blue, to New Viren, to help mediate things and ensure that a conflict does not break out. But it's almost like he's doing it for himself too. He needs to discover what he is capable of. We have the master and the disciple as two sides of the same coin, and quite literally, within this text. As we transition on, and as the identity of the narrator starts to shift, starts to merge, starts to collect, which reaches its high point at the very end of Return to the Whorl. It becomes both a tragedy. This is a tragedy in many ways. I had seen it described as that, and I agree with those assessments. This is the tragedy of Horn, and it is the discovery of Silk, but the discovery of Silk kind of discovering himself too. And the way that Wolfe goes about doing that, I mean, this book has such an emotional core to it. The heart and soul of this is just nothing but it's love, it's loss, it's kind of everything in between as well. Um, I mean, just the scenes of when the narrator is walking the streets of the town he grew up in on the Whorl of Viren, and he's remembering things from his childhood. He's even kind of remembering things, I think, from Silk's life as well. Kind of all these lives are being intertwined, all these memories, and it is a shadow of what it once was, and he needs to leave that shadow behind and return to where there is possibility. That sentiment alone is kind of ironic considering the concluding paragraphs of the book, um, of needing to leave what was lost behind, but then, as the ending proves, needing, in the end, once you find what is new, to return to what was lost. Um, for there is where the necessary future lies, and it's very interesting the choices of the narrator, um, in the afterword or that is described in the afterword of this book. Um, we have legends here. Silk himself, we learn, kind of after the events of Book of the Long Sun within the Whorl, we learn that he ruled this Chaldea for a while, and things were a little bit turbulent. They weren't quite as smooth as maybe Silk or many others had hoped for. He voluntarily steps down from being Chaldea, and there is rumblings of a Silk god. He kind of gets moved up to the figure of a godhead, and kind of within all of this, the presence of the vanished people, of the neighbors, of the outsider. Even I think at one point, I forget if it's in Green's Jungles or Return to the Whorl, where the narrator perhaps mentions that the real god, or the truest form of the gods that these characters worships, is the outsider. The outsider is more of that indefinable. They know Paz, they know Scylla, they know all of these other deities, and yet the outsider is the one that perhaps remains the most true, because they never see the outsider, and that allows for that kind of, when that indefinable work begins, a lot can then take place, as we see with the beginning of Book of the Long Sun. When Patera Silk receives enlightenment on the ball court. But Silk has legends of his own right, legends that carry over thanks to Whorl. Whorl, through almost his anguish of leaving his master, or his teacher, behind on the Whorl, that regret that he carried with him for decades, manifests. I mean, him and Nettle, I think, collectively. And Nettle is one of the greatest aspects of the tragedy of this series, in that, their reunion is so stunted, and it underscores just the sacrifices of Whorl to try to bring this teacher back to where, when he finally sees his wife again, I mean, he knows she won't even recognize him, because he is not Whorl anymore. I mean, of course, it's incredibly sad, and but he writes this narrative almost as a salve or an ointment over the wounds of a new world that is treading water. I mean, literally and figuratively, I guess, because they're on a very big ocean planet. But they need a reminder. They need a guiding hand. And so even though Whorl, I suppose, isn't the one to come up with the idea to try to bring Chaldea Silk back, or to bring him to blue, Whorl runs towards this opportunity. And yet he forsakes almost everything that is near and dear to him. I think with his relationship with Sirac in On Blue's Waters, how his own character um, devolves until, ironically, he is the shell, even though his consciousness inhabits the shell of Silk's body, it appears, thanks to the help of the vanished people. And, there's a lot of, there are many aspects of this series that just on a first read, I don't fully understand, and I'm perfectly okay with that because Gene Wolfe, his works are meant to be reread, to be revisited, and so I like that there are things that I'm not clear on, and I know will return to it and will get back to it. I don't want to just look up what the readership consensus is on some of these things. There are some crucial things like the identity of the narrator that things like that really need to be worked out immediately. But then there are other things like the nature of the vanished people, more of the nature and background of the Inhumai, the aspects of the weird dream astral travel that Whorl and the Inhumai characters in particular travel when they travel to Green or when they travel back to Earth. And that becomes, I guess, a little more, the links and why they're able to do that becomes a little more clear, I think, towards the end of the book, specifically with things related to Oreb, or the goddess possessing Oreb, or who they think is possessing Oreb. This book also really ties in very nicely to Book of the New Sun, which I was not anticipating. I guess I figure that there would be links in a certain way, but not as deliberate and explicit as happened towards the end of Return to the Whorl. And forgive me if I have been just going off on all these spoilers, but I mean, for the few who watch this review, I assume you've probably read all of these, and honestly, even knowing the bare bones of the plot, even some plot points, it's not going to ruin the experience by any means. But when Horn and I think Hyde too, I think Jolly and Juganu by the end, Oreb, when they return to Earth and then they meet Severian. And I think they meet Severian. They meet Severian at two different points in his life. They meet him, and I think they meet Thekla too. And Horn slash the narrator gives Severian the idea to write a chronicle of his life. Silkhorn inspires Book of the New Sun. So one could argue, if Silk was the one to kind of touch off all of this, and then that makes the opening scene of Book of the Long Sun even more, which is the start of the ball cord being the butterfly flapping its wings that leads to the creation of the hurricane, and the influence perhaps that the outsider may have had. There's so many like cool little connective moments now. But then when they see Severian when he's a boy as well, and at first I thought that this would go all the way back to the necropolis scene at the beginning of Book of the New Sun. When they go to the necropolis to kind of view, I think it is the original Scylla, and dig her up to kind of literally lay that to rest and establish some peace of mind. But there are aspects with that dream travel that, again, I don't understand, and I am perfectly okay with that. Likewise, the nature of the vanished people and the Inhumai, and more on the how much of Horn is present within the narrator at one time versus how much of Silk is present at another time. And, I think, obviously, with Wolfe being a Catholic and, in a broader sense, a Christian, in all of his works, a Christian or Christian references and I think the term is lacunae or whatever it is, pervade throughout. And I often think of, I forget if in the Bible where this might be, but it is, perhaps it's in one of the letters of the apostle, or that Paul wrote. This might be in Romans, it might not, I'm not sure, but he must increase and I must decrease. I think if that is Paul referring to his own inhibitions, his own sinful nature, whatever you might call it, must decrease, and the virtues and the grace and the love of Christ must increase. And I wonder if Wolfe is kind of playing at that a little bit with Whorl and Silk, um, that Silk must increase within this body and Whorl must decrease. Um, but that is where the real tragedy comes into hand. So it's like Wolfe almost kind of twists that, or whatever he might be doing there. There are other moments too, like I also have to mention, I haven't mentioned him yet, the character of Pig. My goodness, what a sublime creation, kind of from the word go, from the first Bucky that he says to when he regains his eyesight back, and whatever aspect of Silk or aspect of Paz or whatever is within him kind of is able to, I think, leave at that moment. It's that he's so, it's those like little character additions in the supporting cast of the story. Characters like Pig, like Hound, and even the sad sense that also works its way up with Horn's sons, Hoof and Hide, when we learn in the afterword of this book that, in fact, for all this time, or those third person sections within the book written by Hoof and Hide and their wives many years later, and then getting to more of the parts of the end, the final kind of emergence of Silk, just it stunned me. And I'll read a little bit of the end when it's the Chaldean and with Remora. I'll read kind of the last couple paragraphs of it just because it just struck me, and it is those kinds of moments that make you then look back on the entire work as a whole and really, really reconsider everything. It says, the vague ache he felt in his chest at times had returned. He took as deep a breath as he could manage, recalling the swords of the torturer's tower. Men were required to lay their head upon the blocks, to be lopped off by those swords, and they did it often with great courage. And this is Remora speaking. Will you peruse it, Patera? I have marked the place. Someone else, someone very far away, said, I cannot imagine that there is anything in the writings that I should not read or hear read, your cognizance. It's here. The open book lay in his lap. He grasped it with both hands and raised it until his shadow no longer fell upon the print. Though trodden beneath the shepherd's heel, the wild hyacinth blooms on the ground. He wept, and another distant voice, Remora's, said, and funnily enough, this is like, I think, the clearest Remora speaks in the whole series. Horn did not fail us, Patera. Chalde, you see that now. Silk nodded. Not only does it kind of, restructure and reframe the track of this whole narrative, but then you realize it's Horn both discovering himself by this quest, but then also losing himself, and then Silk rediscover. It's this weird kind of almost inverse circular path. We get the discovery and then the descent of Horn, and then the slow rise of Silk to the fore by the end. That Horn in the end did not fail, it seems, even though Horn or Silk and company return to the Whorl at the end, and I'll kind of read that too. See if I can find it here. That Silk congratulates them on having survived the attack of the Inhumai. He says, we will sail tonight. I've been dreading it in a sense. I've killed their father, though the outsider surely knows that I've never meant him the least harm. I don't want to have to face his sons, and we have a great deal to do before we go. back to Viren, to the stars. I asked where they were going. They will find a lander there that can fly there. One will come, and if they will not give it to us, we will take it. Soon after I left them, and I believe this is, is this Daisy writing it? I forget. Soon after I left them and went to my father's boat for my sewing things, thinking only about the wedding and how beautiful it had been before the Inhumai attacked, and never thinking at all of those books he left behind on Lizard, which I knew nothing about then, but over which I have labored for hundreds of hours now. And then the faint blinking star that old people call the Whorl is fainter than ever. I went outside to look at it a moment ago, and although I could not make it out with the telescope, it is no longer visible to my naked eyes. They are in it, I hope, he and his eerie young woman, Nettle. Nettle, the old Sibyl, and the bird. On course upon a greater sea, to strange new islands. Good fishing, good fishing, good fishing, good fishing, good fishing. They're going off on an almost perpetual quest of sorts, but and perhaps the message of Silk being brought back, it's not ultimately in the physical sense. He doesn't remain with them. He leaves. He leaves straight away after he's almost rediscovered himself to then go back to the Whorl. But then the text, this body of work, this legend of sorts, remains behind, similar to Book of the Long Sun, in which the narrator could kind of see the impact that such a text had already had in kind of perpetuating and creating these legends, this story, and that alone, maybe that's what Wolfe is saying. I'm not sure that story alone will suffice, but the individual is perhaps kind of always locked in this sort of in this quest of sorts. Why Silk can never stay still, and and some say too that with the wounds that Silk had, that he had committed suicide after Hyacinth had died, and he couldn't bear to live without that connection. He had lost himself completely in death, and again, and then that's the weird inverse again, right, with Silk and Whorl, of Whorl dying too. And then he's still there, but then decreases. Of Silk, his waning influence, but a lot that we can only really discern through what others say, prior to when Whorl and Silk's memories kind of inhabit Silk's body upon Whorl's return to the Whorl. And this, I've been rambling here, but this, it was a very lovely way to end this book. I think Return to the Whorl it's right up there to me with Sword of the Lictor, and I do love Earth of the New Sun. I get that that's perhaps a hot take. I have the feeling that a lot of people generally not necessarily dislike Earth of the New Sun, but they don't rate it as highly. I loved Earth of the New Sun. And so for me, those are kind of his standout three in this. And Return to the Whorl itself is just a lovely, lovely book that is so heartfelt and yet tragic. And I already can't wait to when I go back and reread through the Solar Cycle, or just reread through Book of the Short Sun. It's been a lovely ride. I think going forward with Gene Wolfe, I'll probably next will read his short stories or a few of his standalone novels, just to kind of, I don't really want, he has, I believe, 2 other series that I have not read. He has his Latro series about, I believe, like an ancient Greek soldier with amnesia. Perfect, of course. Classic, Wolfe protagonist. And then his Borrowed Man duology. I think those are his other 2. So those are 5 total books. One is kind of a series with 3 books. The other's with 2. But he has a ton of standalones, which I have not read. All of the books that I have read of his have been part of a series. The Wizard Knight, or all of the books within the Solar Cycle, are of course all connected with one another. So it'll be nice to just, be able to read a 300-page Wolfe novel and, you get the whole thing within just 300 pages. You're not then having to look back on it after which I don't mind doing by any means, but it'll be nice to have that. So, good fishing, everyone. Return to the Whorl. If you have read it, let me know what you think. And as always, I will see you guys next time.